It's time for your daily dose of all things Chicago sports. This is the Daily Score. Now, here's your host, Mark Grote.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into the Daily Score. I am Mark Grote. Thanks for watching or listening like you do here to the Daily Score. And today we are going to be talking about the Bears and their hopes for a new stadium. And where they would like to put it would be in the museum campus. But obviously you are going to get a lot of pushback when it comes to that in terms of the money, in terms of the land. And we all know all the hurdles that the Bears have to go through to make this happen if they truly are earnest in their desire to be building a new stadium in the city. One of the hurdles that the Bears will have to go through or reckon with is a group called Friends of the Parks, a non-profit organization. It's a watchdog group. And, they're concerned about the parks and land which could be better used, all sorts of different things like that. For reference, they were crucial in 2016 when the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, as they called it, Star Wars Museum, would seek a location outside of Chicago after a protracted confrontation with, as they call it, FOTP, Friends of the Park. So we know they have a little power, they have a little say, and we got a chance to talk to him. As a matter of fact, Dan Bernstein and I on the Bernstein and Holmes show talked to the spokesperson for Friends of the Parks, Fred Bates. And I wanted you guys to hear some of that just to get an idea of what the Bears are looking at and what their concerns might be right now.
About 3 months ago, the Bears started talking about the lakefront once again through various political and public sources. And we still are waiting months later for a proposal to understand it, to get its details. Friends of the Parks is anxious to see in a fine, much more clear way what it is the Bears are thinking about, what they're proposing, and why Soldier Field site next to on the parking lot, that in quotes, which is part of the Chicago Park District park system, what it is that they're thinking about, why it's a better site than Arlington Heights, why they want to come back to Chicago after they sort of left us in the lurch. And Pritzker obviously focused on whatever the cost of this stadium, it's going to be more than the $2 billion that the Bears say they can put together for this. There's going to be infrastructure issues no matter where in the city that this stadium gets built. And we think it's time for a much larger public dialogue about the two sports stadiums that are being proposed, the White Sox and the Chicago Bears. And we would like to see a lot of thinking in the community about what's the right place for both of these teams if they need to build new stadiums. We have suggested things like the Michael Reese site, which is, I understand, available. We understand the Bears have to some degree looked at that. We don't know what their sense of that space is, but I can't imagine that a good architect couldn't put together a good stadium in that development. But there are other sites around the city that would really deserve meaningful consideration because of the needs of so many communities in Chicago to have a robust, vital, new complex in their neighborhoods. And everywhere on the south side, both the Bronzeville area and other areas, as you go around the city, have good potential for being sites for the Bears. And there ought to be dialogue about what makes the most sense here. And But first, though, we need to understand what it is the Bears are proposing at this point, and we just don't know that.
I think there may be some people wondering, well, what is Friends of the Parks and what power do they wield here as a nonprofit board? And I think part of the answer to that is in the penultimate paragraph of yesterday's statement, the three capitalized words, public trust doctrine, land protected by the public trust doctrine. And in some ways, that it's your organization is representing and has successfully, through federal court, held up through precedent now, your power in civil court to enforce what the public trust doctrine means. So as this goes on, what are the levers of power that can be controlled by your group?
I think we would like to look at this more as the levers of power in the community. We think that it's not just a Friends of the Parks issue, it's an issue for the community at large, and that the community ought to be part of the dialogue about what makes sense here. The Bears certainly will thrive in the city. If they're here, we'd love to have them be in the city, but we'd like to see it in a context in which it does more for the city, for the neighborhoods of the city, and doesn't impose on the existing park system. The lakefront park system is the jewel of our park system. It's been protected for a century, and this is not the moment to back away from that. It's the moment to embrace it. So we are waiting to see what the Bears have to say. We did file a suit against the stadium that currently exists, and that suit was decided in 2003. And although we lost that suit, we think the climate has changed with the suit we brought against the Lucas Museum being put onto the lakefront. We think the principle that the Bears are fundamentally private doesn't get hidden by the fact that there would be a public facility entity that would be the owner of the stadium. We don't think that changes the legal picture.
Hey, Fred, just for the sake of people listening too, and I understand what you're saying about putting the stadium in places in the city where they could take advantage of it financially. You mentioned Michael Reese. What is wrong with building at the museum campus? What are the issues that would arise from the perspective of Friends of the Parks?
I think we would have to understand what the Bears are proposing at this point. All we have is some sketchy sense of they're talking about putting it on the parking lot space, which is what people say it is. We call it a park, and we think it is a park. The Park District has been committed to fully making it a park, but at the moment, and then apparently they're including tearing down the existing Soldier Field and retaining the colonnade. They are also proposing in some very vague way a restaurant and bar entertainment component in this, and that seems to shift it meaningfully from something that should be on the lakefront to something that should be somewhere else. So we feel very clearly that understanding this better is central to how we talk about it going forward.
Has the board met as a group? And I'm just curious how this particular statement, there's a lot that went into this statement. You know, this is more than just a couple of paragraphs, and it's obviously very thoughtful. And I'm just wondering, did the Bears announcement necessitate a full board meeting? Do you have a committee that drafts this statement, a subcommittee of the board, or do you guys all work together?
We all work together, and I think we are in harmony on this.
Is Irma Tranter involved in an emeritus capacity still?
She's certainly still a friend of mine, but no, she has not been involved with the board.
I'm just curious because she was really a champion of the effort regarding the Lucas Museum, and I know that for the time that she has spent and what she has meant to that board for so long, I can just imagine her champing at the bit to come out of semi-retirement and continue to be involved.
A fascinating thought.
Fred, you guys, you mentioned it. You guys had the power to, to have the Lucas Museum people decide that they didn't want any part of Chicago after that protracted confrontation that you guys had with them. And I guess I look at this from people who do desire a stadium at the museum campus right there in that very spot. Do you feel like you guys would stop it? Like, do you guys have the power to decide where the next stadium would be?
I don't think we're in a position to answer that. We need to look at what's being proposed. Again, it's still nebulous and unclear. A lawsuit is never a solution to a problem. And we had negotiations with the Lucas folks, with the city, intensely to look for alternatives with respect to the Lucas Museum. We weren't able to reach a place of agreement on that, and there were many things that were discussed. And we think in this case, we'd like to see much more discussion, much more understanding, and understand what it is the Bears are proposing at this point.
At any point, have the Bears been wise enough to approach you on any back channel rather than just put this out there publicly and then say, oh yeah, friends of the Parks, they're going to have something to say, especially understanding with Kevin Warren taking over some of all of their business practices. I'm frankly a little surprised that they wouldn't already have said, hey, here's what we're going to propose. Here's how we're going to need to sit down and discuss this. Any outreach, any diplomacy from them whatsoever?
There has been some, and I won't say more than that. There have been folks that have reached out and who we've been in touch with.
But you guys got in touch with them first, right? Like, there was no call from them ahead of time on this.
I'm not going to.
Okay.
Okay.
So, Fred, as we let you go, what is the timetable at the moment? Are you expecting the Bears to present further details publicly? Are you expecting there might be a private meeting ahead of a public announcement where they at least give you some advance awareness of how they're going to proceed?
We certainly anticipate meeting with them and discussing it with them, but we would hope whatever happens is very public.
Again, that was Fred Bates, friend of the Parks right there, giving us as much information as he possibly can. Obviously, he's not going to be able to give us everything, and I think that there's more to come with this. Look, I've made it clear what I want, and I think that's why I was asking the questions about in terms of what is wrong specifically with the museum campus and, his want for this to be in a different place. Like he mentioned, the Michael Reese Hospital site as well. Look, I don't live in the city at the moment, but I am of Chicago, lived in Chicago for over a decade, probably close to 2 decades. So I have a lot of pride in the city. So I do understand some of what Fred Bates is saying and the Friends of the Parks in terms of wanting, the city to get the best opportunity out of a potential stadium and not to tear up too much land and to be respectful of all of that. I get it. But I also think about the fact about what the benefit is of putting it on the museum campus. And I just think that the whole thing, even just the way it's done now, I understand that Soldier Field is not the prettiest looking thing in the world, but all those buildings that are in that area, the museums and McCormick Place and Soldier Field and all of that, it all looks right to me. It doesn't feel like an eyesore. It doesn't feel like a waste. It doesn't feel like destruction of beauty or land or anything like that. So I do hope that they come up with a way that they can make this happen in the city. And then there's not a deal breaker like there seemed to be in 2016 with George Lucas and the Lucas Museum and the people that were trying to put that particular one together. Now, look, if there's another site that makes sense, I'm always willing to listen, but this did not. And I respected what Fred had to say for sure. And I'm glad that group exists, but I still think that there's a way that it can be built there on the museum campus, and not too much of a stretch in regards to that. So that is it for today's episode. Thank you all for listening. Again, that was Fred Bates, Friends of the Parks, the guy that you heard from Bernstein and I on the Bernstein and Holmes show, which I will be hosting again. I'll be in for Lawrence Holmes again today. So I'll be on from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. with Dan Bernstein, with Ray Diaz, who's at the other side of the table as we are recording this. He will be executively, expertly producing the show like he does, like he just did this one. So for Ray, I am Mark Grote. Talk to you soon on the Daily Score.